So imagine a family where the father is, let's say, one of the richest men in the country. He's enjoying life. His children are driving the best cars. His wife moves around in maybe a Land Cruiser or Charlie, think of any of the big cars. Okay. Then his children go to the best international schools. Everyone in his family is leading a nice life. Then one of these days, his children go out and they start hearing some rumors about their father, that the father is a bad person and he doesn't do things really nicely. So they start sowing these rumors into the child's head or the children's head. And then the kid goes home, and instead of him to speak to the father about it, or even let's say, let's have a meeting, daddy, oh, I want to ask you about something, nothing of that sort. He conspires with his siblings to start fighting the dad. And eventually, they kill the father. The house gets disrupted. How the money was coming in, nobody really knows about it. They try to take over the family business. It doesn't work. The same outsiders who told them bad things now come inside the disrupted house. Since there's some discord, they come and take everything that was in the house. Their cars, their riches. And now this family is broke because they decided to listen to foreign influence and they decided not to sort out their issues internally. This is the case of Libya and Muammar Gaddafi. Hi everyone, my name is Melvin and you're welcome to the Melvin Journey. Over here we discuss politics, we discuss health, and we also talk about my personal day-to-day life. Whether you're looking for information about politics, especially African politics, this is a channel for you. We're also going to talk about how to keep your health and to preserve yourself because, as you know, health is wealth. Don't forget to like, share this video, comment, and subscribe to the channel. So let's get into today's story. Our story starts in 1969 with a young Muammar Gaddafi, who was at that age about 27 years old. And around this time, Libya was being ruled by King Idris. And King Idris was seen by Libyans as a king who was actually pandering to the agenda of the West. Libya was a highly corrupt state as at then. And the Libyans wanted a revolution. So around that time, Libya was being led by a monarchy. And some of the junior officers, who were actually led by Muammar Gaddafi, decided to overthrow the president. And they kept this a very big secret because we all know, like with monarchies, there's a lot of people who are loyal to the king. And in as much as people like to say Gaddafi was a violent man, was a terrorist and stuff like that, Gaddafi actually succeeded in a bloodless coup. You heard me right, bloodless. That is, there was little to no bloodshed when Gaddafi and his officers actually took over Libya on 1st September 1969. Gaddafi ruled Libya from 1969 all the way through to 2011 until his, I would call, unfortunate demise. And we need to know what Gaddafi has done or had done for Libya. As around that time, just between 1969 and 2011, Gaddafi had managed to nationalize Libya's oil. What do we mean by that? We mean that 100% of anything oil in Libya, okay, was owned 100% by the government. We're talking about from mining to refinery to export. All that money was going to the Libyan government. Imagine how rich that made the Libyan government. Gaddafi was also responsible for masterminding the Union of Africa. He was a Pan-Africanist. I would also say Pan-Arabist or Arabist, Pan-Arabist. He was for the entire Pan-Arab economy. And he was widely seen as a visionary leader. This was the Gaddafi that the West were so afraid of. Over his time in Libya, Gaddafi managed to introduce free housing, free health, and free education for all Libyans. Libya was a growing economy, was a very prospective economy, with the fact that it employed a lot of people from neighboring countries, and Libya was one of the fastest growing economies in the world. It had one of the best currencies, and it had one of the best GDPs ever seen in economic history. In case you don't know this, Gaddafi was personally responsible for helping telecommunications on the African continent, in the fact that before 2007, each African TV station, anything involved in telecommunications, it had to be routed to European satellites, to satellites from the US, and we were paying millions of dollars to the States and to Europe in order to just access satellite services. Gaddafi launched a satellite service, not a satellite service, he launched a satellite called the AfriStar satellite in 2007. And this was personally financed by Muammar Gaddafi, as at around the time, it cost him 300 million US dollars. And this was a significant improvement, because what this did was that it allowed not Libya alone, every other country and every other telecommunication station in Africa to have direct access to satellite services, and we cut a big cost on paying for satellite services to the West. It also helped reduce the cost of, data prices or telecommunications prices, because other competition sought to lower their prices, because now there was competition which was more or less state-owned, or should I say free. And this initiative was because of Muammar Gaddafi. So when we are thinking about Gaddafi, maybe there is a bad part to think about. But he obviously had very visionary ideas to help transform the continent. Now, let's talk about Gaddafi's downfall. What happened? So, the West, the US, or other countries in the West, started accusing Gaddafi of funding terrorism. And this actually led to some instability within the Gaddafi government. And they also managed to sow discord among Libyans. And when I'm saying sow discord, I'm saying sow discord in the sense that Libya had a thriving economy, Libyans had free education, Libyans had free housing, free healthcare. As a citizen, tell me what would make you unhappy that you have to protest against your president. So there were wide-led street protests across Libya, and these street protests, they finally resolved, They finally morphed or formed into a civil war. And this civil war now started attracting foreign attention, and the foreigners actually felt like they had a say in what is going on in Libya, and they teamed up with some high-ranking people of the uprising, those who were against Gaddafi, the anti-Gaddafi movement. And they actually decided to overthrow Gaddafi, which eventually led to his death in 2011. Gaddafi was accused of terrorist attacks and also funding militant groups across Africa and also outside of Africa. And because of that, he actually had a lot of tensions with the West. When I say the West, I usually mean the US. Because of that, Gaddafi had a lot of tensions ongoing with them. Gaddafi was also accused of being directly involved in the PN-AM flight 103, if I'm being exact. And aside that, he was also accused of being a dictator. And all those were information that was coming from outside. Okay, nothing directly being reported from Libyan sources. But obviously, if you want to sell the idea that someone is a dictator, you would like everyone else to think that the Libyan media was actually not being free to report. So then, what happened to Muammar Gaddafi? Muammar Gaddafi was trying to fight rebels, as he called, because there were factions within the Libyan army who were being financed by external forces. And those external forces were seeking to throw down the Gaddafi regime. So like we said, during the Arab Spring in 2011, there were protests. Those protests led to civil wars. And those civil wars eventually escalated into a full-blown war. Then NATO actually decided that they would intervene. With the intervention of NATO forces, Gaddafi was eventually captured in a very gruesome scene, which was actually displayed for everyone to see. Captured on October 20th, 2011, and was killed on live camera. Everyone else saw it. It was more of a spectacle for the rest of the world to see. In my opinion, if a country's leader is being killed, we will not say a leader of a country that was not doing well. The country was doing immensely well. They were one of the best economies in the world. And their leader was being killed while televised on live TV for everyone to see. Mind you, this is a leader who orchestrated a bloodless coup. Is to say it again, so that we know that he was not really a man of violence. When he was interested in overthrowing a party that was not doing well for his people, it was bloodless. There was little to no blood involved. And this man was murdered like a chicken for everyone else to see. It was more of a power move to tell you that if you decide to stand up for yourself, we will kill you. And what bothers me the most is that the African Union was aware of whatever happened to Muammar Gaddafi months before it happened. If we are trying to be more factual and not being circumspective about things, President Museveni of Uganda actually mentioned that the AU knew of what was going to happen to Muammar Gaddafi, and they were informed not to do anything about it, not to intervene. Bro, can you imagine someone who has no jurisdiction in Africa is coming out from their country to come and tell you that, I don't know how many African countries are there, if I'm right, probably 54 African states. And someone is coming out of their country to come and tell you in Africa that we are about to attack a leader of an African country. Not just attack, we may probably kill him. And all of you sit down and say, okay, we won't intervene. We are going to intervene, diplomatically, and we are not going to mobilize our military. Bro, can you go and do the same thing? Can any African country decide today that we're going to kill the leader of China? We're going to kill the leader of the US? We're going to kill the leader of any of these big countries? We can't even conceive the idea because we are afraid of being met with brute military force. And we sit down while someone who had clearly had the best interest of Africa in his heart, we allowed him to get murdered in cold blood, tied to the back of a vehicle and being dragged for everyone else to see. Our leaders had failed us as at that time. And we need to amplify this message so that they do not fail us again. Now, someone will ask, it's Libya or it's just Libya? It's an Arab country. It's this. How does that really affect Africa? Well, the answer is so simple. Libya is in Africa. Libya is part of the African Union. They're on the same continent as every other African country. And we watched their leader get murdered. We didn't do anything about it. After that, we also haven't done anything about it. We've not seen... All we saw some of our leaders do was openly criticize the fact that that happened to Gaddafi. But, okay, if it happened to Gaddafi and we watched it happen, it will probably happen to another leader who decides that the African continent, it needs to stand by itself. So does it mean that anytime that somebody decides to stand up and say, okay, we want Africa for Africa, or we want the best for ourselves as a continent, we're going to watch him get murdered? No. Now let's talk about the things that this has actually done against the African continent. Mind you, Libya employed a lot of Africans. And once that instability started, they all had to go home. For those of you who are also conversant with the illegal migration routes, you should know that Libya plays a very key role in the illegal migration routes across Europe. So Libya is more like the center of some of the illegal migration routes. And this has happened because there's political instability in Libya. Now, some of the foreigners who were there are actually being sold as slaves, or they are being abused while on illegal migration trips to Europe. This same thing had also caused Libya, whose oil was nationalized up to 100%, to now have some form of privatization in its oil industry. There are also rumors that while this war was going on, some countries were siphoning oil out of Libya. And for now, those are just rumors because none of those countries has actually come to claim responsibility about stealing oil from Libya or anything of that sort. But then, Libya's political instability has really caused a lot of issues because now they had provided, as around that time, intelligence suggests that Libya had actually provided breeding ground for terrorist groups such as Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And all this because they allowed a rumor to become the source of their political instability. As of now, Libya doesn't have free healthcare, free education, and free housing for their citizens. And this was the case when they had Muammar Gaddafi as their leader, the so-called terrorist leader. If a terrorist is providing me free healthcare, free education, free housing, probably only the element of free speech is where there might be a slight problem. And all these elements of Libyans weren't free to speak are only being reported to us by the Western media. So probably Libyans were allowed free speech. Just do not overthrow the government that is seeking to do well for you. If you decide to overthrow them, then you're labeled a rebel. And that to me sounds quite okay because if everyone else is benefiting from something, why would you decide that, okay, let's disrupt the peace? You automatically become a rebel. And we can see it from Libya's economy now. The economy is not doing as well as it was doing. So obviously, those people didn't like good things for themselves. Or I wouldn't even say themselves, because obviously if they had that much backing, financial backing, then they don't stand to be at a disadvantage when anything bad happens. So they literally cost the people of Libya their economic freedom. Now, there are also armed groups that are disrupting oil production in Libya. And what they do is that they obviously know where the oil is being produced, where the export points are, where it's being refined. They cause chaos. Today they are doing this, tomorrow there's a bombing, there's that. They're stealing oil and affecting Libya's oil production. Libya has also become a hub because as a point of as a point of political instability, it's become a hub for a lot of international interests. Reports suggest that the UAE, France, and Russia all have significant funding inside of Libya. And their funding has literally made Libya into a multi-factional state. As in, there are some people who are pushing the Russian agenda, some of them are pushing the UAE agenda, some are pushing the French agenda. And because of that, this is to tell you that there won't be peace because there's conflicting opinion everywhere. And this conflicting opinion is heavily backed financially. So it's going to be a long time if these foreign interventions are not removed for Libya to actually see peace. Now, the next question anyone may ask is, all right, it's just Libya. How does it affect the rest of us? First, we talked about affecting us in terms of employment. Now, the second thing is Libya is in the Sahel region. And once this started, there was a lot of weapons and anything else that was used during the Libyan uprising. Majority of it got loose and started getting sold to people in the Sahel regions. And now imagine an influx of weapons and also people who feel like they have a personal interest or a national interest at heart. An influx of weapons being sold across the Sahel region. When we're talking about the Sahel region, we're talking about countries like Mali, we're talking about countries like Niger, talking about countries like Burkina Faso. And we all saw what happened there right after the Libyan war. We won't say right after, but between 2011 to 2025, we've seen things that are happening. There was an insurgence in Burkina Faso. There has been an insurgence in Niger. And there have been conflicts in Nigeria. We've seen the likes of the Boko Haram and other militia groups. So to tell you, where did they get those weapons from? They could have easily gotten them from Libya because the Libyan war started. People got access to weapons from foreign countries. Weapon dealers and everyone else who's interested in also making a profit would initially start selling to surrounding regions. And that's what happened. Now, remember we talked about ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And those terrorist groups actually use Libya as a base. So their base, obviously, in terms of the fact that Libya has political instability, their base has expanded. And they now have liberty to move across the African continent by being stationed in Africa. So that is a big disadvantage. And now, the final thing I would like to mention is that Libya has significantly contributed to the European migration crisis due to the fact that Libya is politically unstable. Why is that? Because now for a politically unstable nation, or should I say unstable nation, where they cannot entirely control their security, everyone else is either militia backed or there's too many sects in one country and everybody behaves as they want. There are military groups, there are areas where the government has control over and stuff like that. So some of these people are using the places that they control to actually hold illegal immigrants, and they use that as a base before they transfer them to the rest of Europe. If Libya were politically stable, if their army was in control of this situation, we wouldn't see that much people going through Libya to get access to Europe. So they contribute immensely, massively to the people who are trying to migrate from Ghana, from Nigeria, from West African countries, through the Sahel, going to Libya, and then finally finding themselves in Europe. And that is a bad condition. I am personally disappointed in the African Union for actually allowing that to happen. And now that we see the likes of Captain Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso, and we're seeing the Alliance of Sahel States, which is abbreviated as the AES, standing for African independence and African freedom, what do we think is going to happen to them? Do we think Libya would have been better off and Africa itself would have been better off if NATO and the US had allowed Gaddafi to live? And what would be our state as a continent or as a nation if Gaddafi had actually succeeded in unifying Africa? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. You should like this video and subscribe to the channel for more information like this. I'll see you guys in the next one.